Hello, hello, hello. Not sure what I want to talk about. I've been going to church. Maybe I should talk about that. Um, Man, there's just so many flavors of Christianity, so many denominations, and not sure what I want to say about it. In part, it's very well. Let me say some positive things here. I love going to church. I really love it. I love going to church. Just simple as that. You know, I grew up Lutheran and I have a strong imprint in me about how church, I realize as I'm going to these different denominations and what's resonating versus what I could do without or, what doesn't work for me. That reference point within me of how things should be is the early upbringing in this Lutheran church in many ways, not entirely, but many things. And I realized how much I loved that church and how good of a church it was to have been kind of initially planted in. Just because it's sort of a middle ground. The one I went to, sort of a middle. I haven't been to enough Lutheran churches to make any universal claims here. I've been to a few, but the one I went to, I've been to many different denominations, just not enough Lutheran to make any big Lutheran generalizations. But having been to a number of denominations, I can say, and just researched and watched videos and, been engaged with this topic been engaged for a while. I feel comfortable saying that the one I went to was a real good middle ground in terms of balance between liturgical elements, ritual, kind of traditional elements. And I can be more specific. I mean, the pastor at the church I grew up in wore garments. I don't know what word he would use, but kind of like a white frock. I don't know. I don't have all the good lingo for the attire. Like a white gown is kind of feminine. I don't want to use that word. Like a white, open, flowing robe type of thing, but like a thicker, kind of thick material, and a green, sash? That's not a scapular. I think that's something Catholic. Anyways, with different symbols on it. I mean, there was an outfit, there was a uniform, and that's not something you could take for granted. As I've come to realize, I mean, that's not some big revelation. It's pretty obvious, but especially in a lot of what I'm going to say is talking about evangelical Christianity, so within the Protestant umbrella. But let me get to that. It's a point about informality but let me get to that in a moment. So yeah, the church I grew up in, the priest had certain vestment that he wore, and I appreciate that. I like that. That's good, because we're not in the world when we're in church. This is a sacred space, right? We're doing something different. We've come to be with God. We're in God's house. We've come to deepen in our holiness, and it's not bad that there should be ritual and there should be signs and certain sorts of commitments. So I like that aspect, that the pastor wore the certain vestments, certain outfit. I think vestments is a better word. Anyways, and certain just ritual elements. I don't remember everything from that. I've been back to that church since, and I think it's pretty similar to how it was. It's a different pastor, but I think most of what I see resonates as being familiar, and that there's a certain structure, and the church I went to, around the profession of Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed, maybe both. I can't remember. Lord's Prayer, that's also kind of built into it. Now there's a looseness to it, or a more progressive is not the word, but contemporary, let's say, elements to the service that I grew up in, which was, worship, music, live band. And I guess in my mind, I'm sort of comparing and contrasting against something like Catholicism, though there's more kind of contemporary liberal churches too. But yeah, I mean, having a flood of things I want to say all at once. But yeah, I mean, there was a band I actually played in it, memory serves, a few times, but a worship band, which is more of a Protestant and getting more into the kind of evangelical world. That there would be live music, drums, guitar, etc. Now, music and worship music, that's as old as Christianity. So I'm not making a point about music, but just kind of the flavor of having a live band and that kind of thing was more contemporary. Anyways, I just, and here's probably the biggest thing for me, I've come to realize: communion. For God's sake, and I mean that very literally, very directly. For God's sake, please, can we do communion? Can we have communion at our churches? I can't understand going to church and not having communion. And yet, so many of the churches I've been to, it's either this kind of like very partialized communion. Like I went to one that was just the blood, just wine, and like passed out in our seats, and so very kind of like deconstructed. I was almost gonna say desacralized. I don't know, kind of is in a way. But anyways, to just no communion at all at some of these churches I went to, I've been going to. I just don't get that. That's the most important part of the service to me. The sermon, yeah, the sermon's also very important. I mean, yeah, it's maybe I shouldn't rank the things, but that's just so central, so key, having communion. And they did it right. I mean, I remember I went through confirmation. Is it called catechism? I don't know. Is that the same thing? But I was confirmed as a adolescent in the church. Had to memorize, I think it must have been the Apostles' Creed and Ten Commandments and Lord's Prayer and a bunch of different articles of faith and dogmas and things like that. Yeah. Professions of the faith. Anyways. And I don't remember the whole process really, but it was confirmed. I think at that point I was eligible to start taking communion. Maybe before then too, I can't remember. Seems like that was part of the deal though. And that we would stand in a circle. I remember doing that. Maybe that was the confirmation communion that we did it that way. I don't remember. But that it was the sacred container, and they would have real bread, actual loaf of like baked, nice, quality bread, rye bread or pumpernickel. I don't know. It wasn't just like white bread. It was like good bread, artisan bread, it seemed like. And wine. I think there's grape juice too, and wine. Yeah, man. It's just very moving and great. It's just such a great thing. And so, yeah, I've loved that at churches, but man, I went to a Lutheran church this past weekend. Well, let me get to that in a moment. But a lot of the churches, and it seems to be that there's so many out there that are kind of these almost like the equivalent of startup businesses, in the business world. There's so many of these startup churches out there that are non-denominational, evangelical, it seems to be just like almost a quintessentially American phenomenon. I don't know if I'm qualified to say something quite that sweeping of a statement, but and in some of those that I've been to, it seems like communion is just not as big of a deal. So I don't know that I have any strong conclusions one way or the other. There's elements that I'm liking in a bunch of different places I've been to. If I have any strong conclusions, I was going to say they're more the things that I don't like, but let me not say that quite so strongly. Yes, in the past, I don't know, let's say 5 months or so, the past year, I've been to just the gamut. Throughout my life, I've maintained an interest in the sacred and in holy sites, and so I've been to a lot of different services, not just in Christianity, or in Christendom. But let's say the past year, I've spent time, I went to I think Russian Orthodox, maybe it's Greek Orthodox. I think it was Russian Orthodox church. Wow, that was a stunning service, just aesthetically so pristine, so moving, so almost celestial. The architecture that went into the building is beautiful and definitely sets a tone, just kind of the high ceilings and the natural light that was there from the outside. It was pretty stunning too. Kind of the domes, cupolas. I don't know what the architectural term is, but there's such an emphasis on beauty and the aesthetic beauty. You felt like you were in is this the right word, antechamber to heaven, or in heaven itself, because the choir, there was just every element, the choir singing and the acoustics of the space was definitely heavenly. It was very moving. I'm pretty sure I was moved to tears. A glimpse of what's to come, a glimpse of something truly sacred, beautiful, a real emphasis on beauty and liturgy and just, dripping with tradition, and talk about vestments, talk about, religious garments. And the people there too are all very beautiful, probably like middle, upper class. It seemed like a pretty wealthy congregation. And so even just the attire of the women and the men, there was something very just beautiful. But the whole service, all the icons, the incense, just sensorially it was overwhelming, but also kind of beautiful. Also kind of beautiful. Now you stand the whole service, and it's an outlier in terms of the length. It was like 2 hours, 2.5 hours or something. So I don't like that. Yeah, I don't love that. It keeps you engaged in it's a very different experience. And you can say there's like a sacrificial element to it, that you're going in and you're not just passively sitting down. It's like almost like not a penance, but a kind of religious sacrifice that you're making, just that, standing and for that length of time. It takes some commitment. I'm not against that kind of thing. Um, I loved it. It was awesome. So many things about it were just awesome, amazing. People there were pretty nice. You cannot partake in communion unless you're part of the church, and I think that's a pretty lengthy process. I don't really know, but my guess. I think I've heard somebody say that, maybe months or a year. I don't know. I should look into that. I don't know if I will, but um, but they do pass out after everyone's taken communion. They do go around and pass out bread to visitors and newcomers, and so that's different. That was kind of nice, like an invitation to sort of partake in the Lord's Supper. Um, I left feeling good from that service. It was a holy experience. It wasn't, and I'll try to weave some of these themes together as I go. I'm just laying out kind of a broad picture here. That there's a dimension of politics that's what I want to say about that. That there's a dimension of kind of political concerns that is a big part of a lot of the Protestant churches. I've noticed a lot of the evangelical churches, and that's a mixed bag. Hopefully, I'll try to unpack some of that. But that was not the impression at all in this space. It was like, no, we're here to worship God. This is a holy experience. It's a full-on immersion in something holy, transcendent, or moving in that direction. At least that's the idea. And didn't have the kind of it didn't have a real political valence to it, or political. Yeah, I almost want to say the world, what's profane, the world versus the holy and what's sacred. This was if we were to, I don't want to say it quite that starkly, but if I were to make that dichotomy and lumping politics obviously into the world and kind of the profane concerns of mundane reality, this was kind of devoid of all that. This was like I don't remember the sermon, but I mean, he may have made some points about worldly life and stuff, but felt like in some ways, like midway between being in a monastery and being in a church. So I've spent time at monasteries and sat in on some of their services, and there was sort of a feeling of there, because there's so many, I don't know if they're all priests or just maybe some of them are monks, some of them are brothers, I don't know. But there's a lot of moving parts going on during the service. Kissing of icons, lighting of candles. I mean, there was just a lot of moving parts. Anyways, so there was a lot there. It was a very rich experience. I've been to Catholic churches many times in my life, and I enjoy it. I really, again, I love the ritual about it. I love the liturgical aspects of it. There's an emphasis on beauty in a lot of Catholic churches. Tradition. There's a lot that I like about the Catholic Church. A lot. There's a lot. There's a lot that I like. And I've made this point before in other videos, and it's both a good thing and a bad thing, but you can feel really in the spirit and moved, and then when it comes to communion, if you're not, I don't know, confirmed, or you haven't gone through some process of commitment to the church, you are not allowed to receive communion. And that's not good. I don't like that. That's kind of brutal. It sucks. Just from, a certain perspective, to be in the spirit and then to not be a partaker in the Lord's Supper. I don't like that. That's not a good thing. Now, that said, again, there is something to a church having certain rules, certain boundaries, certain barriers of entry. And it's kind of, in a sense, demonstrates a certain self-confidence and trust in their own. It demonstrates a certain confidence, I would say, and there's something healthy about it too. I can also recognize of them, saying, if you want to partake in these sacraments, the way we do it, in the Catholic Church, there's a commitment there that you need to be committed to it. And so I kind of see both sides of it. However, if somebody's really in the spirit and is not there just casually, or, what's a good word for that? Recreationally, or just, I don't know, flippantly or something. But they're there in a sincere way and really partaking in the service. I don't know, it just feels wrong. It just doesn't feel right. I also don't love that it's wafers, I get it, because I think in Catholic Church, Catholic tradition, a lot of these churches are doing Mass and communion every day. So, bringing in bread, and I don't think you really get like individual little things of wine either. I think maybe you dip the wafer, from what I've seen, in the wine. Maybe you can drink out of the cup. I don't remember. But anyways, there's a lot that I like about Catholicism, and I could say a lot more about that actually. But now, having kind of said that, a lot of the churches I've been going to, and I've just been exploring, I've been giving myself the chance to explore. Most of them, a lot of them have been, let's say I went to a Baptist church, went to an Episcopalian church, which I understand is a branch of Anglicanism, the Anglican Church, or related somehow. Maybe it's the same thing, I don't know. And I think just a lot of these non-denominational churches that are not really affiliated with a larger tradition, or that are really the kind of church that would say of itself that we're a Bible-believing, Bible-teaching church. You see the mark of Protestantism really strongly, as I understand it, the emphasis on sola scriptura, but very stripped of any kind of like traditional elements. Not that there's not like their own kind of worship, rhythm and schedule and way of doing things, but the types of churches where, people, generally speaking, in a church are dressed in respectful clothing, for guys, pants and button-up shirt, and women, not bearing too much skin, hopefully, although that hasn't always been true. But the pastors in these churches, there's nothing really formal about it, and I think that's by design. That is by design, and it's kind of a small thing, but yeah, and maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but it's not my favorite. Like I said, I like that there's a formality sometimes, and a set apartness, that we're doing something different inside this space. And so I think that, religious attire can kind of help to set a tone. But yeah, so a lot of these churches, it's just like business casual, or I don't know, church casual attire. And one thing that's kind of unavoidable that I've come across is the political divide. The churches are either liberal or conservative. And I think that's part of why I really like the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, is because there's such big tents, especially Catholicism, and such long traditions that they're drawing on, that there is kind of a stability there, and there's also um, a a groundedness in God, in Jesus, in the sacred, which is not to say, because obviously there are more liberal Catholic churches and more conservative Catholic churches, more liberal branches of Catholicism, movements within Catholicism, orders within Catholicism, and more conservative ones, that divide and that kind of political, those values definitely are reflected in Catholicism, but they're not supreme in the same way that I've seen in a lot of these other churches, where there is a very strong marriage of the political and the sacred, the political and the religious, political and the spiritual. In a lot of these churches, it's in both iterations, the kind of woke leftist, that's probably more offensive to me at this point in my life, I'll just be honest, and more repulsive. Not like repulsive in the sense of like two magnets. It just not. It just feels, it just feels not like something I would want to be really associated with at this point in my life. And just because I see how damaging that really kind of radical leftist ideology is, it's sad. It's sad to see it, how deeply it's infiltrated in so many of these churches. And it's because, first of all, I've done videos on the dangers of radical left ideology, having been in it for a long time. Part of what so sickens me about it and repulses me is because it's like a concession. It's placing the world above God. And it'd take me a long time to really articulate that, but in a simple way of saying it, it's like a secularization. It's like the world and all its values. The church is something different, ideally, you're coming out of the world to go into the church, but the world is just so has so infiltrated, has so overtaken some of these churches. It's like, what are we doing here? It's so diluted in the sacred container that it's like, I could just go to a political rally for this crap. I could just go to some activist space for this kind of bullshit. It's like, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here for God. I'm here for Jesus. I'm here to, I don't know. I went to an Episcopal church and I just didn't know anything about it, and I should have done some more research about it, but very obviously leftist. You go to church to be, I don't know. It's hard to even go down this road, because you just, and it's kind of sad, because the type of Lutheranism I grew up in, I went to a Lutheran church this past weekend, and almost everything about it I loved. It was very similar to the church I grew up in. They even said the Lord's Prayer the way I like to say it. The kind of King James, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. They said it that way. It's the only church I've been, even the church I grew up in no longer says it that way. So I loved that, man. Absolutely love that. Love that, love that, love that. But yeah, they did awesome communion, so many things, but just all this, yeah, around the edges. I mean, there's just so many little catchphrases and buzzwords, and if you've kind of gone through the gauntlet of all the leftist crap for years, you just you don't miss out. You don't miss it. You don't miss it in terms of I don't miss being around it, but you also, it's unmistakable, you know, the kind of keywords and energy of it. And yeah, and there was, you know, just social justice, and there's a way in which you can pick and choose certain passages in the Bible to, and it's not because justice isn't a biblical thing. It is, of course, but it's like the church has acquiesced or kowtowed or deferred to the social justice, leftist social justice ideology, which is a kind of pseudo religion, secular, profane. It's such a lesser thing, and the churches just seem to have adopted all this with such reverence. Like, I'm trying to think of a good metaphor. I mean, what God offers, what Jesus offers, you know, is the highest. And it's like they don't recognize that everything else is subsidiary to that, and they've kind of bent the knee to these ideologies that are corrupt and just at such a lower altitude. It from where I stand now, it just seems such a foolish thing, a shame. It just seems like a shame. I don't know. I can't think of a good way to express it right now. It's like you've got the full banquet and you're settling on fast food, you know? I don't know. Anyways, or poison, even worse. So I don't love that, and I don't intend to go to that kind of a church. And there's all these, you have to kind of dig into it and go to the church's website. I mean, I picked up on it in the service, certain things. Yeah, again, it's a shame, but when you go to the website, you know, for Lutherans, there's something called the ELCA, I think, Evangelical Lutheran Council Association. I don't know what it stands for, but and I come to find out is a very kind of liberal. You know, there's a lot of kind of like woke social justice ideology in there. And this church is affiliated with that council or whatever it is. So you kind of have to do a little bit of digging to figure these things out, but you know it when you hear it, when you're in it. So I don't love that. Now on the other side of all of this, I've been in a number of churches that are very right-wing. And there's a smugness on both sides that is just, I don't agree with. It's something I just don't like. Kind of smug assuredness. because you see people are identifying with their politics, and that's a lower altitude than your identity in God. It's just like, let's do something different while we're in here for 1 hour, guys. You know, you're letting the small self run the show. You're letting your political identity and your grievances and your righteousness and your confidence in a political worldview that you've been sold largely, that's been ratcheted up in our psyches by social media and the algorithm. And that's not God's message. Now, it's not to say that there aren't political implications. And I would never say that, you know, you want your spiritual practice, your church, whatever, to be able to speak into this world and to speak into a corrupt and a profane world, obviously. Obviously, of course. But when it feels like we're just in here doing political commentary with a kind of superficial glaze of Jesus, I don't know, it's just, I have a distaste for that. It's not. Now, that said, I've been thinking, you know, I guess I identify as an independent, you know, if we're going to talk about politics. And I've been thinking in my mind, I would say I'm definitely not a leftist, definitely not a Democrat. Or no, I would probably say it like this. I'm not a Republican, and I'm definitely not a Democrat. You know, I'd probably phrase it something like that. Because I think, you know, I want to just stay open, and I want to be open to being heterodox and not having things neatly fall into categories. But I think in general, I'm probably independent with maybe a more of a right, center right tendency on some issues. I don't know. Again, it's not, we're so obsessed with politics in this world and in this country especially, that it's not a central part of my identity. You know, it's not where I draw my energy from, or my sense of, you know, the source of my life is not drawn from that. You know, it's just not. So it saddens me, and I have an aversion towards it in the church, though, because it just seems like in this world of duality, we just have to fragment and we have to split. It's just like inevitable that it's going to be either one or the other, with the exception of something like Catholicism, which is such a big tent, and maybe the Orthodox community. Where there's, like I said, there's kind of more of a groundedness, and but it seems like you just kind of have to accept that your church is going to be more liberal or more conservative. You know, that like independent middle ground. I'm not so sure that really exists. And given that choice, I think I'd feel more comfortable, you know, for the most part, given that I would have to choose, in a conservative church. Again, I wouldn't want that to be the main part of anything related to going to church, but just, I guess, the values and are less. It's less offensive, less repulsive to me when I hear some of that stuff get brought up at this stage of the game. You know, it's all an evolution, and nothing's concrete. Anyways, I'm rambling. But and so, yeah, that's just kind of an inevitable part of church in America, I think, is this kind of political intertwining. But I've seen it all, man. I've seen it all. Very conservative churches that are, I guess, probably somewhere not too far from, or maybe even explicitly would profess a kind of, what's the term? Christian nationalism, that kind of marriage of, I guess, the end game being theocracy. So yeah, just very conservative values in the church. And now, what I do like about a lot of these conservative churches is that they are Bible based, and you go in there, and some of them, like one I went to, I mean, most of the drama is in the pews, is in the seats. A lot of the drama, anyways. This one I went into, pastor was a great guy. I could see liking going there just because of the pastor. At a lot of these places, the pastor's been really cool. Well, let me get to that point in a second. But yeah, and there wasn't a lot of liturgical elements. There was no communion, which is not happening for me. But it was like the majority of it was like Bible. He was in there. He was preaching out of Ezekiel, I think it was. I can't remember. And, really going in depth and making connections and talking, scripture. It's like a Bible lesson. That was awesome. I loved that. That was really great. In a way that you wouldn't really get in a Catholic service, or you wouldn't really get in a Lutheran service. I mean, they'll bring it into the sermon, and you've always got Bible readings. It's part of the rhythm of the service. But no, this was like an exposition on, a good couple of chapters in, again, I think it was Ezekiel. And that's great, man. I really liked that. A lot of the worship music, I'm not somebody who is in any way offended by that. I know that can be kind of a thing in traditional Catholic circles. Vatican II kind of liberalized certain things and brought in more of a, I don't know, acoustic guitars to certain churches. And, I don't know if it was an evangelical influence or what, just trying to appeal to the time people and maybe bring in, I think it was like the idea was like, let's modernize, let's bring in some contemporary elements, let's bring in some worship music. I mean, Catholic churches and choirs and, traditional chanting, Gregorian chant, all that stuff, that's nothing new. But having like a band and live music is not, it does happen in some churches, Catholic churches, but I don't think it's the most common thing. I think it's mostly a Protestant, mostly an evangelical thing. And I like that. I like live music. A lot of the worship songs are really great. I like singing, so. Well, I guess you sing in Catholic churches too. Anyways. So I like that about a lot of these evangelical churches. I was going to say this one church, the pastor was just expounding on the Bible. The guy I was sitting next to, super flatulent, just like letting the farts fly, no shame about it, like physically readjusting his body, lifting up his leg. He was an old guy, and part of me had this like inner knowing of, I think he's probably got some kind of a condition. I don't think he would just be in there being so grotesque and rude. I think he's probably got some kind of a bowel thing going on, I hope. But he was just, yeah, like every minute or every 5 minutes or so letting just these very loud, audible farts. Happened to sit right next to me, so I had to get up and move at one point during the service. That was like a nightmare. Also, you just get mobbed because there is this kind of, I don't know if groundedness is the word that is coming to mind. In denominations that have more of like a traditional heritage and grounding, there's a settledness among the congregation that can be kind of refreshing, especially if you're newly there. There's just this kind of ambient level of collective naturalness, comfort, relaxation, lack of self-consciousness in those spaces. In a lot of these kind of non-denominational churches and stuff, it's a different energy. It's like more personality, like big personalities, and you end up getting kind of mobbed and energetically drained by a lot of the people in there. I don't know if the term is love bombing. It's not quite that, because that's more of like associated with cults, but I'm somebody who's an introvert, and I can get drained really easily, and yeah, you just end up getting kind of cornered by, I can't think of a good way to describe it, but energy vampires, I guess. You know, in a way that doesn't really happen at a Catholic church or even at Lutheran churches. And I mean, people will approach you, and during the passing of the peace, you'll say hi to people, and but most it's going to happen is someone's going to say, hi, welcome to church, your first time here, it's nice to have you, my name is so and so, what's your name? That's great. But anyways, I can't think of a good way to describe it, and that definitely happened at this church with the very gassy older gentleman. That's a big turnoff for me. I'm not there. I don't want to be self-conscious in church. I mean, I get it when you're new. There is some of that. It's almost like this feeling of insecurity somehow in some of these churches, that you don't get in other churches, in some of these older traditions. It's like there's a thirstiness or just this energy vampirism that I don't really find. And I think it's an insecurity among the congregation or the parishioners or something. It's like they're looking for new blood or something. I don't know. Anyways, so it's been very interesting, and I've looked into it, and so I guess there's been a split, since the time that I was young, going to the Lutheran church. I think a lot of it had to do with gay marriage. That was a big, I think, turning point and kind of modern day split in many denominations. Fork in the road, where there wasn't any of that kind of crap, the social justice woke crap when I was going to church. It wasn't, and it wasn't that there weren't works of mercy and outreach and doing kind things for the community, justice, in that sense. It just wasn't this anyways, I could go off on a rant here, but smug, arrogant, narcissistic, bunch of different words coming through. Anyways, but yeah, so I guess that must have been a big turning point. I don't know. I'm kind of just piecing things together here. But I looked into it, and there are other Lutheran churches that are on the more conservative side of it, so I'm interested to try that out. Keep asking the Lord, do you want me to become Catholic? And I don't know. Part of me thinks that, I don't know. But yeah, I also kind of want to try out Methodism. I mean, my name is Wesley, so, and I've been to one. It's been a while, but it might be interesting to revisit going to a Methodist church. And so, anyways, time for me to go to sleep. Take care.